We're in a series right now called Encounter with God or Encountering Jesus, but we want to encounter the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, this Trinity. We want to be examining the Bible, his written word, the way that he chooses to reveal himself in this world, the Bible, and connect with stories in the Bible that connects with our stories, that then we allow him to change us. I've been speaking particularly about encounters with Moses. And last time I spoke about Moses as a baby being drawn out of the water, having a rescue plan for each one of us, that God is drawing each one of us, no matter our circumstances, no matter how much the circumstances of this world seem to be against us, that he's drawing us out again and again to his rescue plan, that he gives us 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 countless chances. And the invitation today is to be drawn out of wherever we are. And so that continues into the story of Moses. And we're going to be talking about how he draws us out and sometimes drives us out to form us to be drawn into his presence. So he draws us out to drive us out sometimes to form us, and he's still with us in order to draw us into his presence. Time and time again, I have conversations with people or see people in different contexts when I'm out, either wearing my dog collar or out doing social things with people that are dissatisfied with life. They may be successful people, or they might be really struggling about something, but the common theme is something's not quite right, that they don't feel drawn out and belonging. They don't feel drawn in to anything. It's not quite right. It's a bit like when you do a long walk. I've done a pilgrimage in the past, and one of the things that we said to ourselves as I did it with my prayer quad, as we did a walk from Winchester to Canterbury just before we got ordained, was if you get a stone in your shoe, deal with it straight away. Because no matter how tiny the stone is in your boot, if you leave it any time, it could be a tiny little stone or a huge stone. You've got to deal with it straight away, because if you leave it in there too long, it's going to cause damage to your foot. And once you've got damage to your foot, then you've got problems. And that feels like a bit like life for people, that they're limping along, allowing the sort of stones to go into their boots and not walking the walk well. I think church services on a Sunday is a time to take off your boot, shake out the stuff, and put it back on, and then go again. And so I'll be joining you for a walk at Twitter. No, I won't be. But what stones have you got in there? You see, we quite often have our hideouts, our things behind the things, our shame scripts or our blame scripts, where we either feel so bad about ourselves or we blame others for why we are struggling. We might have gifts and a calling. We might have passions. But there's something not quite right with our character. There's something to be changed in the presence of Jesus. We often look for a quick fix. We talk about it quite a lot here. We get a super app or a new book and we read the first 3 chapters and we never quite finish the rest of the book. But it's going to transform our lives. I got the book Atomic Habits in the summer and I read it. It's amazing. Then you draw the thing with the books is you've actually got to put it into action. And then the problem is we get in the way. And so I had a kind of that moment recently where I spoke at King's Cross Church, which is KXC, large church in King's Cross, strangely enough. Good branding on the name. And suddenly, when you get your Instagram reels, suddenly if your name appears on one of those, it sort of throws it up. And there was a little bit of pride as I thought, I appear on KXC's reel. Until I saw it. And then I've got this delusional thing where I walk around where I think I'm still 28 years old, that I'm still quite blonde, and that I'm quite athletic built, and I've still got the round face. I've always had a round face, so I've always looked quite young. So I had this illusion that I'm still 28 years old. Unfortunately, when I saw that reel, it's like, oh my word, that shirt is under pressure. That's all I could see. I was thinking, oh my word, that's my buttons. Thank the Lord I wore a t-shirt under that shirt. I was like, oh my goodness, I am grey. Why do I have short hair at the side? It's because it's virtually white. Not a bad thing, Eddie. But as I said that, I just looked straight at Eddie. But there was things I was looking at, I was going, oh my word, this is not good. This is my motivation. This is my line in the sand moment when I'm going to get an app, which I did for my phone, which came up on one of those reels, and I was like a sucker, and I was like, I'm going to do that. I'm going to join the gym. I'm going to get new trainers, because that really matters. And suddenly I'm going to be pressing in, and I'm going to look at that reel and go, I have got to lose some weight. Strangely enough, there's this thing called, and I don't know if it's from the devil or from heaven, but Marks and Spencer's Spice Buns. Every evening, suddenly Liz goes, oh, I've just bought. I was like, oh, you are joking. You are not helping my battle. But I've got the self-control and weakness of a gnat. And so I find myself quite often having a great day until I get in and I go, oh, I just had those Spice Buns. Oh, there's a spare one because there's 3 of us. I'll have a little bit more. And so strangely enough, under my own trying, nothing seems to really happen. And that's a bit like us sometimes with our walk with God. That's sometimes our walk against some of the things that we press into. But I know that this is the conversation that is happening out in the world time and time again. You know, I went to and met some businessmen. I was lucky enough to be invited by Alan and Rachel because of Alan's company, to corporate entertainment for sport. That changes how you watch sport, I tell you. But we went to see a football match, but there was these really successful businessmen, all in their 60s and 70s at the table. All had run big businesses and were very successful. Yes, they started to talk to me about my story, and they were like, oh, can you tell us more? It's the effect that we went back in and they sat and they moved their chairs and they said, tell us more. One of them said, I've been reading Genesis. I'm looking for something. There's something not quite right. He didn't quite get Genesis. He said, what is that all about? I said, oh, go to Matthew, Mark, Luke and John first and then work your way back. But there was something in those men that they weren't satisfied. They had something in their shoe despite of all the success in the world. And then yesterday afternoon, I had the pleasure to be invited to a gathering from the Iranian exiles who have been here for a number of years. That have been campaigning year after year for freedom in their country. And I sat with a woman who's been here for like 15 years as a lecturer at the London School of Economics. And she was saying, oh, I don't do religion anymore. But I'm really campaigning for women's rights in Iran. And I suddenly told her about Jesus in this context and said, the first witnesses to the resurrection was a woman. And Jesus is the first person that sets people free. And suddenly she was going, I've never heard it put like that. And there was still something in her shoe as she explored. And there's something that's for all of us to fix ourselves. And that's what our faith is about. That's what Encounter's been around. It's not about our prayer, our programs, our praise or our property. It's about an encounter with the risen Jesus. Because everything else will leave you hungry, will leave you with a stone in your shoe, and won't deal with the core issues of your heart. Matthew 19:26 kind of says, well, doesn't kind of say, it says, Jesus looked at them and said, with man this is impossible, but with God all things are possible. This is when he said it was a narrow way, and the disciples said, who can do that? Who can do that on their own? No one. We can only do this journey with God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. We need to be drawn out with a rescue plan. We need to sometimes be driven out into the desert places to be formed with Jesus. And we need to be drawn into his presence. It's getting stones out of our shoes. Let's turn to scripture. Exodus 2, verses 11 to 22. One day, after Moses, and Moses drawn out of the water literally means, and we've been following his, he was put into the river Nile as a baby and rescued. He's grown up. He went out to where his own people were and watched them at their hard labor. So if you remember the context, the people of Israel are slaves in Egypt. He saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his own people, looking this way and that. It's never good when someone looks this way and that, does it? How often do we look this way and that to see if anyone's watching? When someone's crashed into someone into a car park and, it's not that bad, the scratch. Or anything we do regarding M&S spice buns in our pantry. No one's watching. Looking this way and that and seeing no one, he killed the Egyptian. Cool, that was 60 miles an hour, wasn't it? He looked this way and that, and he killed the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. The next day he went out and saw 2 Hebrews fighting. He asked the one in the wrong, "Why are you hitting your fellow Hebrew?" The man said, "Who made you ruler and judge over us? Are you thinking of killing me as you killed the Egyptian?" God, imagine that cutting to the heart. Then Moses was afraid and thought, "What I did must have become known." When Pharaoh heard of this, he tried to kill Moses. But Moses fled from Pharaoh and went to live in Midian, where he sat down by a well. Good stuff happens at wells, doesn't it? Now, a priest of Midian had 7 daughters, and they came to draw out water and fill the troughs to water their father's flock. Some shepherds came along and drove them away, but Moses got up and came to their rescue and watered their flocks. When the girls returned to Reuel, their father, he asked them, "Why have you returned so early today?" They answered, "An Egyptian rescued us from the shepherds. He even drew water for us and watered the flock." He's probably thinking, "God, this is a great guy. This is a keeper. Why have you left him there? And where is he?" Reuel asked his daughters, "Why did you leave him? Invite him to have something to eat." Moses agreed to stay with the man who gave his daughter Zipporah to Moses in marriage. Zipporah gave birth to a son, and Moses named him Gershom, saying, "I have become a foreigner or a sojourner in a foreign land." This is the word of God. And so we learn in this passage some things that help us take the stones out of our shoes. Moses, we read in different parts of the Bible, in Acts 7, verse 22, is a man, I think it's going to come up, hopefully. Moses was educated in all wisdom of the Egyptians and was powerful in speech and action. And so we read in Acts as Stephen, who's being martyred, he declares that actually that Moses is 40 years old at this time, and he is known throughout for his words and deeds. And so what we know about this preparation for Moses is that he is part of the cultural elite. He's been coached and trained. He's been taught and schooled in all the best things in life, all the leadership training you can imagine. Moses has been given in the household of Pharaoh. If he was in today's context, you'd say go to public school. Might have gone to Brighton College or to Eton. He's been given every access to everything. And he is a man of mighty works and deeds. He knows a lot about a lot. I know something about a little. But Moses has this background at 40 years old that seems to set him up for life. When I've reviewing this as I was preparing to preach today, I thought about the time that I came and had to get lots of stones out of my shoe, a time of humility and humbling. But at the time, just before, if you looked at my life, I was 36 years old, less grey hairs, a little bit more athletic, looking much better if I appeared on a reel, but they didn't exist then. But I had a degree, I'd got 4 A-levels, I'd got 13 O-levels, for those who remember O-levels. I'd played cricket and rugby to a high standard. I was in the police, had a great reputation. I was getting promoted. My deeds and my works looked fantastic. But I had a limp. You see, we read in this story that Moses, there is some great stuff about Moses here. There is great stuff that's going to be used by God in the future. But it's not quite right yet. He's courageous, he has empathy, and he's compassionate. What we know in the history, which is my first degree is in history, and I love history. If you examine the other sources at the time in the Near East, that they will tell you that the Egyptians viewed anyone of the working class and slaves as subhuman. Like the caste system in India. They would not look at a slave or someone from the working class. If you were from the elite, they would see them as subhuman, like the Walking Dead, as if they had no soul or were just an animal. And we read that and we can see that outplayed in other areas of Exodus where you see violence and you see rape, you see genocide. But Moses, 40 years old, steps out and challenges Pharaoh's systems. I think we see that verse I said, and he went really quickly. I wonder how long he'd been watching Hebrews being whipped. Do you think it's the first time he's seen it? Probably not. But slowly but surely, something is happening to his heart. He's caring, and he's compassionate, and he has empathy. He steps out of his comfort. He steps out of the control and power and the approval of the Egyptian system and steps out courageously to fight injustice. You see, I think it was me. If I was Moses, I'd like to think I'd do the same in my good days. And then I look at myself in the mirror and hit reality, because I think I'd probably say, guess what? I'm quite good in an institution. I'm quite good staying in the comfort and the control and the power and the approval of even the Church of England. And actually, what I'll do is I'll stay where I am and I'll exercise that for good. And we kind of get ourselves into a kind of pattern where actually we stay comfortable. Oh, we're going to stay there. But we see Moses step out of that and let that go completely. We read in Hebrews 11, 24 to 25. Hopefully that'll come. By faith, Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be known as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He chose to be mistreated along with the people of God rather than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. So what we learn about Moses is he's compassionate. So he's moved to action. He has empathy, because we read there, don't we, in verses that he sees them as his people, his very own people. So he has empathy with those people. He has courage. He has compassion. He has this supernatural that both nurture and nature. I think it comes from his mother, who had the bravery to step down to the River Nile and send her child into the rushes. It comes from her sister, his sister that stood by and watched and made sure he was okay. And it comes from his stepmother, Pharaoh's daughter, that steps in and takes a risk. His mother was a risk taker. His sister was a risk taker. His stepmother was a risk taker. These women nurture him in his giftings of compassion, empathy, and courage. If you know the Hebrew word, if you go back into that, when he was watching over the Egyptian whip the Hebrew, if that Hebrew word is used again in the Old Testament, it is in Genesis, where Hagar, the slave that Abraham married, looks on her son Ishmael and has compassion and watches over her son. Is that compassion in Hebrew means you watch and you see, but you're then made into doing action. It's not a watching and seeing, just I feel sad, I'm going to pray, which is action in itself, before I get emails. It's actually physical action alongside that prayer. Moses has compassion to act. He has that empathy where he sees from being Pharaoh's comfort and stepping out to see his own people. In many ways, in this story of Exodus, if I could have that up again, Alex, he is an incredible man. He's been drawn out. He's been given a great start in life, but he's not formed. Because we read this and think, oh, Moses is incredible, but he hasn't heard from God yet. There has been no burning bush moment. But he's got great giftings. He's got a great start. And he's starting to see with God's eye. And God is in the background in many ways at this time with the women in his life and he's doing stuff in his heart, but he's not yet stepped into his complete calling. Sometimes we can do that. Sometimes we can have a great gifting and a kind of calling, but we're not quite ready to steward it yet. I think that was what I was like at 36. I had great compassion. I served as a police officer because I really, really cared for the people. I wanted to make a real difference. But actually it was about me trying to be God and not trusting God. And we see in this story that Moses is trying to be God, but not trusting God. So where are you in your life trying to be God and sort yourself out rather than trusting in God? Maybe the stones that you're going into your shoes you're putting in because you're trying to be God. Where are you trusting? You see, Moses takes matters into his own hands, and it's not the greatest strategy for bringing freedom to the people of God. Because actually what he does is he finds himself completely alone and lost. He's no longer an Egyptian in a Pharaoh's house, and his own people don't really know him. And he gets driven out. You see, even he sees his own people as in the image of God, and he relates to them, but he takes a working class person, the taskmaster, and he still deals with him subhuman, and he kills him. So he's not formed even there. So he's seen, maybe these are my people, but I still hate those people. Quite often, when we're faced with difficult trials, there's anxiety and there's anger. If you read the rest of Exodus, and we will do as we go through Moses in my preaches, anger's a bit of a problem for Moses throughout. He's still dealing with it throughout. So don't feel that you need to arrive before God uses you, but you'll be formed throughout your life. We'll be learning lessons in our 80s. That look around tells me that Moses' action was premeditated. That is a matter of character. And that's why the character school is something that we want to really press into. Because that's where we get formed, when we get teaching, we get a cohort around us, and we seek the presence of God. Can I encourage you to keep pressing into what the character school might be for you here? We need to stop trying to be God and start trusting God. That's why we stopped everything in January. We need to rely on him, not us. And then we see after this murder, after the Hebrews have rejected him, after he's no longer welcome in Pharaoh's house, I wonder how long Pharaoh's been waiting for an excuse to get rid of this troublesome son. He's sent out and he's driven out, and he goes out into the wilderness, we read, the desert place, and he sits by a well. And I think he contemplates lots of different things. For us, trying to be God will mean relying on the idols of this world, either dumbing down the pain with either sex or with money or success, all those different idols we can sort of hide out in. But research has said that there's kind of 4 things behind all those idols. That's where we stop seeking Jesus. We seek our own comfort, our own control, our own power, and our own approval. And that's where we hide out behind the thing. Our comfort, our control, our power, and our approval. You think quite often in the West it would be about comfort, and often it is about avoiding pain. Quite often we don't want to give something up because it affects our comfort. But actually, research has seen that actually the things that are really at work in our lives is control. That's the number one by far. You can see it when we ask about anything in our lives that we really don't want to go there. Be that our money, be that our time, be that our talents. We want to still be in control. All of us on a journey of that. The second one is power above comfort. And that is often where we need to review where the power lies in a room. You have positional power. I do as the vicar. I have spiritual power because of what the bishop has laid hands on. You have historical power for those who've been at St. John's for a longer time. You have relational power because people have been friends. You have knowledge power and wisdom. You have experience power. Power is inevitable in all our spaces of life. But what we've got to do is name it and know it and not rely on it. So control and power is often where we stop encountering Jesus. You see, when we lose or feel we're losing control, power, comfort, and approval, there's two responses: anxiety and anger. So what's making you anxious? And what's making you angry when your control and power has been taken away? I think we're called to trust God because he is God. He's out of time. He has all power. He has all resources. You know, right now, I can't be at home watching our dogs probably running up the stairs, nipping onto our beds, quietly moving around. I can't be with my mum as she sort of navigates something right now. I can only be here in front of you, but God can be everywhere. I think I'm quite strong until I started playing football at the age of 50 and realised that's diminishing. But I feel I could deal with most situations physically still. But there's lots of situations I can't. But I believe in a God that can. I've only got a certain amount of time, and I go along to the Iranian discussions and think, oh my goodness, this is overwhelming. But I believe in a God that can deal with all that. And so I take my anxiety and my anger and I present it to the cross. But it exists all out in the world. If you're a policeman on Christmas Day, what's the number one call you'll get? Number one call you'll get about 2 o'clock is domestic violence. Number 2 o'clock is families have had enough of each other and started exercising power inappropriately and control. And so it exists in church, it exists in the world, and the answer is Jesus. You see, Moses is still, even as he gets pushed out, still exercising that control and power. He sits by the well and he does a great thing. He's still courageous, he's still got empathy, and he has compassion because he has these daughters that come and he sees these shepherds, and shepherds are not to be mocked in the ancient worlds. They can handle themselves. But Moses can handle himself really well. But he's still lost. He's still in a wilderness and he still needs God. And so, if you're anxious, if you're angry, some of us get detached and don't even attach those feelings. But if you feel detached and just numb, you've got stones in your shoes, just like me. Because we all get it. And the answer is to come back to Jesus again and again. I lack wisdom. I love to read, but I often misapply what I read. I need Jesus. And when you look into the Bible as we come and finish, you'll see that time and time again, if you feel in a wilderness, if you feel alone, if you feel it's a tough season, the greatest formation, the greatest transformation is happening. Jacob, in Genesis 28, meets God. Elijah in 1 Kings. John the Baptist, Jesus, Saul of Tarsus, Hosea, the Desert Fathers, me following a heart attack. We meet Jesus in the wildernesses. So if you're anxious and you're angry, if you're detached and numb, if you feel alone and it's a struggle, Jesus is with you. Because we read, don't we, that Jesus met a lady at a well, a different well. And that Jesus, fully human, fully divine, let go of his comfort, let go of his control, let go of his power, and let go of his approval. Gave life to that woman at the well and went onto the cross for us, where he still needed to cry out to God, but gave up everything so we might have life to the full. So we're always drawn out with a rescue plan. More often not, in the hard knocks of life, we're driven out with the Spirit and with Jesus to be formed. And we're always drawn into his presence. So if you've got stones in your shoes today, maybe it's a time to come forward for prayer ministry and be prayed for. We all got stones we got to get rid of. We've all got hurts. But we got Jesus. And we can look at the story of Moses and go, it's going to take time. He was 40 years old with all the wisdom in the world. He was still learning. He still carried the anger throughout his ministry in some shape or form, but he was becoming sanctified. And what do we read at the end of his life? He went absolutely restored up to heaven. Isn't that our prayer? God's not looking for the most gifted people. He's looking for people that need him. So let's stop trying to be God or striving for God. Let's start being a community that trusts God. Shall we stand?